Welcome to Side of Science.
With Stacey and Clinton, because every story has a side of science.
On today's episode, we are answering the question, WTF is the cloud? We're talking about Sputnik, servers, space storage and streaming.
So, Stacey, today we decided we'd talk about cloud computing, which on the surface doesn't necessarily seem like a topic that is great for us to cover.
It's not my strong suit.
But once we got into the research a bit, we've found some really interesting stuff that I think will be interesting to talk through today. But before we go to cloud computing, I think it really starts, cloud computing goes way beyond the clouds really and starts in outer space. And I've got a little bit of a story or a thread that I can share with you today.
Amazing.
That will bring in the science and also give us the foundations of really where cloud computing comes from. So it also connects, interestingly, Genghis Khan, the International Space Station, and Steve Jobs. So bear with me, we'll get there.
Okay.
So let's go back to a place called Toratam, and I'm going to apologise if I butcher any of the names, but it's in Kazakhstan now, but it was the USSR, back in October 4th, 1957.
Okay.
This is not the first time in this podcast that we've gone back to Russia in the 1950s.
True. A lot went on.
Yes, but we digress. So Toratam is the name means Torres grave in Kazakhstan, and that is the connection to Genghis Khan because Tora Baba was a nobleman and a descendant of Genghis Khan. So there's our first link. The place is flat, treeless plain, extreme climate, think dust storms, temperatures going above 50 degrees Celsius in summer and ice storms when it's negative 30
You're not
degrees.
selling it.
No, not at all. It's sounding like the episode of Mars.
Yeah.
This is almost like a flashback episode. It sits in the middle of the vast Central Asian desert, or the vast Central Asian desert, 2,600 kilometres southeast of Moscow and 1,300 kilometres from Kazakhstan. So it's far away from the two closest main populated areas. And the Russians have built a space centre here because it's flat, it's far away from populated areas, and it's as close to the equator as the Russians can get.
Right.
So it's got the perfect kind of combination for sending rockets, satellites, and spaceships into space.
Why is it important that it's close to the equator?
Because they're able to capitalise, as I understand, off that proximity to the equator gives it a better trajectory, basically, into outer space.
Able to get out. Yeah,
there's some maths around it.
Yeah.
So to throw the Americans, just another kind of interesting fact, to throw the American competitors off the scent in terms of the fact that they were developing space technology, they changed the name of the location to a town that's a few hundred kilometres away called Baikonur. And that's important because today the Baikonur Cosmodrome is still a functioning space centre. It's an important piece of infrastructure that still supports launches to the International Space Station.
Right.
So they changed the name. They're sending the Americans off the scent. So it's from here on a chilly autumn evening at around 5:30 p.m. back in 1957 that the Russians launched the first missile into space, Sputnik 1. We all know Sputnik, but we're like, right. But like, what is that? Why is that important? Okay. So Sputnik is the Russian word essentially for satellite in an astronomical context, but it also means spouse or traveling companion in a broader context. So it's a polished metal sphere about 23 inches or 58 centimetres in diameter with 4 external radio antennas to broadcast radio pulses. And it's sent up into space and it orbits Earth for about 3 weeks, sending this beep, beep, beep signal back to Earth before its battery runs out. This beep, beep, beep signal becomes a marker for essentially the space race that will take off in the 1950s and 60s because the Americans are able to hear it on just your average like household radio. They're able to pick it up and it terrifies them because the Russians are basically beating them to space. So at this point, President Eisenhower decides to form the Advanced Research Projects Agency in 1958, which is going to originally in his mind focus on space exploration, but then NASA is formed a few months later. And this organisation, APRA, basically ends up having a remit focus on high risk, high gain research. And then they ultimately end up under the leadership of a man called J.C.K. Lickleader. Just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, okay. Call him that. Does he know you call him that?
I think he ended up becoming called Lick or something. But like, I'm not even going to do that. Like, we'll just know that this man is basically the forefather of the internet and cloud computing. He always believed or kind of foreshadowed that we would have this symbiotic relationship with computers. And he used an analogy of the fig tree and an insect essentially that only is able to pollinate the fig tree. And he uses this analogy to talk about the symbiotic relationship that humans will ultimately have with computers. And under his leadership at the APRA, they formed the APRA Net, which is really the world's first entree into a connected network of computers. And that is basically how we end up with the basis for what is modern day internet. Like the same protocols and systems that were used there became what we use today in the internet and cloud computing. And I guess just to kind of like round it all out, it's ultimately doing this work with the APRA Net. The Vietnam War hits, funding gets tougher, Xerox steals some of the intelligence or the people, the experts that are working at APRA, and they come and start working on what would become more like consumer technologies, what we know today. And Steve Jobs visits their laboratories in the 1970s and is inspired to basically form the first Apple computer, which obviously goes on to make history.
Yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah. So there's a lot in that, but I guess just to kind of round it out, as I said, as for the town of Baikonur, where the first satellite was launched into space, it's also interestingly where in 1961, Yuri Gagarin, the first man sent into space, and then in 1963, Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman sent into space. And the Russians, because they no longer own the territory, it's now Kazakhstan, they have an ongoing lease agreement where they're paying about just a small amount of about £82 million a year to rent this because it's so valuable.
Yeah, wow.
So there we go. It's a long story, but it's got threads. I think it gives us the foundations of really modern day computing and how we've come to have this network across the globe, which also gives us essentially cloud computing.
And the analogy of the fig and the wasp that pollinates the fig, that idea that we are now so reliant on this for growth. And that's a good story.
Well, I just thought of my relationship with my phone and I was like, yes, definitely symbiotic.
Yeah.
And my watch, like I can't get by without them. And I think this really is a lot of the principle around not just the internet, but obviously cloud computing and how I think why we wanted to talk about this is because it's so much part of our lives, but the connection to the sciences isn't always so obvious.
Well, it is interesting too, because I remember watching that movie, the name escapes me, but it's basically how BlackBerries kind of came about, like the phone and email in one. And this was, it took off, right? Because what an idea, you could send an email while you're on the run.
It's wild.
Yeah, imagine. But the problem was that before, and I remember I lived in the States when I was 15, and to call home was so expensive. And you're paying for minutes. And with the BlackBerry, the problem they ran into is, well, how do you send an email from a phone and you're paying for the minutes, and how does it actually get sent? And now we don't pay for minutes. You can send an essay, you pay for data. And it's really flipped it all on its head.
A lot to dig into.
Yes, let's do it.
To bring it back to Earth,
yes.
or more specifically back to the clouds.
Yeah.
And where we started with this is WTF the cloud.
Yeah.
Like we all talk about it now, but what is it?
It's where all my stuff lives.
It's where everything is.
Everything.
I can't function without it.
No.
If you're using Google Drive, if you're using photo sharing, if you're watching things on Netflix, if you're listening to music over Spotify, it's all
my
cloud.
Photos, they live in the cloud.
Yeah.
In simplest terms, the cloud is a physical network of servers housed in data centers. Why is it called the cloud? It's your next question, isn't it? So it refers to a metaphor for the internet, which happened in network diagrams. So when they had the internet in a diagram, they would draw it as a cloud. And so that's where it comes from.
It's kind of interesting, right? Because the idea of the cloud gives us this feeling of something very in the sky, up in space, ephemeral. But actually what we're talking about are data centers, massive data centers,
Big.
with rows and rows of servers, with, as I understand it, cables laid running below the ocean, connecting this all up. Like, it's actually a very physical, on-Earth thing.
Yeah, I mean, the engineering involved in the data centers, but particularly in the cables, is quite interesting. So the data travels via electromagnetic waves, so radio or microwave waves, through cables and signals. And then you have these undersea cables that around 99% of international internet traffic travels through submarine fiber optic cables. So these are bundles of glass fibers that transmit light impulses, and they each carry bits of data using total internal reflection. The cables are laid on the ocean floor and span hundreds of thousands of kilometres between continents. So to get them there, to make sure they sort of stay on the ocean bed, the light that I think the fiber optic cables are actually encased so the light isn't emitted, because I was terribly worried about all the sea organisms. Yeah. But that's not a thing, so panic over. But they do get ripped up. Sharks have been known to attack them or have caused issues, anchors, and other things that have disrupted it. And heaven forbid anything happens to the cloud. So,
right,
yeah.
we'd be disconnected by these wires, because I always assumed that it was via satellite, but as I understand it, satellite's a lot more expensive and perhaps not as reliable, whereas good old-fashioned hard lines laying across the ocean floor, joining countries, is actually how our data is being transferred.
Yeah, so the engineers have had to survey the ocean floor using sonar and mapping technology to avoid hazards like the trenches, volcanoes, coral reefs. There's also politically sensitive zones and natural disaster zones, so looking into where you can actually lay them, and then the building of the cables. So they're about the width of a garden hose, and they're built to survive extreme pressures. So the glass fibres, gel layer to keep water out, steel wires and copper tubing, so they're not cheap, and then the plastic sheath for waterproofing as well.
They're not big, though. Like, a garden hose is not big.
No.
Like, all our data is going through a garden hose from, Australia to Thailand.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, these data centers are actually, because there's so many servers in them, they heat up. Like, you know, when your laptop used to overheat, it doesn't really happen anymore, but...
Yeah, I remember reading stories of people, like, burning their legs because they were working for too long on their laptop. Yeah. And they got, like, I shouldn't laugh, but they got, like, third-degree burns on their thighs.
I laugh, because if it gets hot, remove it. Like,
yeah, it's not tied to you.
Exactly.
I mean, that really is taking symbiosis a step too far, right?
Yeah. It's funny. So actually, a lot of these data centers are because of the heat, they're in really cold climates. So you'll see them in the United States. They'll be in Virginia, Oregon, Iowa, Ireland, Dublin, for example, Sweden, Australia, Sydney and Melbourne, rather than, say, Queensland, and Iceland.
Just to help with that cooling.
Yeah, just to make it easier, because... we'll dig into it later, I guess, but the energy and water requirements are about cooling these so that they don't overheat and cause problems.
So in answering our WTF the cloud, Stacey, we now know that it's essentially hard, on-the-earth infrastructure that is primarily data centers with cooling, ideally placed in cooler climates, with hose-like cables running under the ocean, connecting it all up. Mm-hmm. And the cables are fibre optic, so they're transferring our data via light impulses.
Yep.
And they're called bits.
Yeah, so all data sent over the internet is translated into pulses of light or electricity, also called bits. And then these bits, so many of them will make up a byte.
And a byte becomes a megabyte and a gigabyte and a...
terabyte and yeah.
Right.
More than you can chew. More bytes than you can chew.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so we now understand what the cloud is. So what's the energy transfer that's happening? What else is going on here?
Well, it's interesting because I've been hearing a lot like recently, a lot of people have been making these figurines for themselves, and people,
with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's you as an
these
action
AI
figure.
action figures.
Yeah, right. With like accessories.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
you'd have a cat.
I would.
And
a Coke Zero.
I was about to say a can of Coke.
Yeah. What would you have?
Good. You put me on the spot. I'll come back to you.
Okay. We'll circle back. It's funny that I knew. Anyway. Yeah, but people have been getting a lot of flack for this because of it's not really necessary and it's generating so much, or it requires so much energy, and therefore that energy is sort of wasted. And so I guess putting that into perspective, like all of this requires energy transformations. So if it's coming in light, then it's got to be transferred. And then servers, when they're doing this, they generate heat and then they require cooling systems, which is a lot of water to cool them down. And so
Which is where the debate about doing random things like creating an action figure come in, right? Like, is this a responsible use of resources?
Yeah. So think cooling systems as industrial scale air conditioners 24/7, and their cooling often uses as much energy as the computing itself. So it's the cooling really that's, I guess, the issue. And so that's a waste of water. And I was hearing something about every time you kind of ask ChatGPT something, it's like throwing half a litre of water on the floor. But it's not really, because a lot of the water will be recycled. And if you really want to look at the heavy lifting of where energy sort of or water expenditure happens, streaming Netflix, that's going an indirect water footprint, that's going to be like 2 to 4 litres per hour of streaming. Producing 1 kilogram of beef uses 15,000 to 20,000 litres of water. That's more than 100 bathtubs. So I'm not saying that it doesn't use water, but in the scheme of things, it's not our biggest offender. And a lot of data centres are putting a lot of effort into recycling the water, and otherwise their water bills would be huge. They couldn't make the profits they're making, I wouldn't have thought.
And you're right. It's not the question of like, that it's not insubstantial in any way. It's more that I guess the question really will become with the popularity of AI, and obviously cloud is not going away. It's going to become, how does it become sustainable? It's already, as I read, about 1% of global power consumption to power all of this network and infrastructure, which again doesn't sound like a lot, but the entire aviation industry is also about 1%, as I understand, of global energy consumption. So it's really going to be about what happens as this expands and the demand increases.
And I think the point to make in terms of like a science perspective is that only some of the energy goes to useful output. A lot of it is just generated as waste heat. And so data servers process data using electricity, but resistance in circuits generates joule heating. And the hotter they get, the more energy needed to cool them. And so energy is lost as heat as electricity and moves through the power lines and network cables. And so the hum of your charger that you hear, that's resistance turning that electricity into heat. It's never going to be, the efficiency is never going to be 100%, but modern systems are improving upon that, on that sustainability.
And it's super interesting already because as you talk about power transfer and power and electricity and wires and heat, there's so much in this already within science that could be explored, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess too, if you wanted to, the ethics of using this in terms of energy efficiency as well. Yeah. So I thought I'd give you some sort of surprising stats, hopefully. So a Netflix binge for 10 hours is the same energy as running a fridge for over a day. If you've got, I probably am guilty of having about 7,000 screenshots. And so that's digital clutter, and the cloud is full of all of that. It just sort of sits
not
there.
My screenshots.
Yeah. That you never go back to.
I have a folder of them.
Yeah, guilty. And and autoplay. So, when you said you'd watch one video and 3 hours later you're learning how to shear a llama, that's pretty much like gym treadmill on the internet. You're just chewing through stuff. Rewatching the same TikTok 45 times is like shipping the same avocado toast from Melbourne to Brisbane every single time. And one email is enough energy to boil a cup of tea.
That is wild. It just puts it into context.
Yeah, well, I reply in thread And so that's a tea party.
That's a lot going on in the power consumption. But it does kind of now start to kind of beg the question, and I think where it gets super interesting is when science, research and investigation connects with cloud computing. Because we talked a little bit about like the concerns about environmental waste and usage and more responsible usage and what's going to happen as this grows.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing simultaneously a lot of research and science as a human endeavor being powered by cloud computing that could never have happened before.
Absolutely. The collaboration that's now possible that wasn't before is phenomenal.
The genome sequencing revolution, focusing on the Human Genome Project, which finished up in 2003 and kind of went across 13 years. It involved 249 countries and was really made possible by the fact that their computers were globally connected. Like, it would never have been possible. And they were able to, or they're able to now, sequence an entire human genome in a matter of days for less than $1,000 through the Genome Analysis Toolkit online.
Yeah, see, that's from 13 years to a couple of days. That's amazing.
We also saw examples in the acceleration of COVID vaccine development, the use of cloud services to design, simulate, iterate and test mRNA vaccine candidates. Again, the cloud platforms were a big part of being able to facilitate that. There's even examples that I thought were kind of quite tongue-in-cheek and quite funny about simulating like physical cloud formations, like as in like atmospheric cloud formations using cloud. There's an international project looking at using a proton synchrotron to basically generate cloud, like to build a cloud chamber and then look at like particles and aerosol particle formation processes. So it's like the cloud creating clouds, which I like. It's kind of like gremlins having gremlins. And then also just bringing it back to space where we kind of started, even work around like capturing the shadow of a black hole using an Event Horizon telescope that, again, just wouldn't have been possible without the connection of data, petabytes worth of data being connected through the cloud to be able to capture images of outer space that we've never been able to have before. So, you know, again, your Instagram feed, getting those images from NASA and international projects going, wow, okay, I'm using the cloud to get that. But that's also being made possible through the cloud. So we're getting a lot of scientific advancements made possible with this technology.
Yeah, so you can use it for entertainment, you can use it for education. There's so many different avenues, isn't there?
The also just to round that out, the Large Hadron Collider, again, a key piece of scientific infrastructure, that is producing petabytes of data annually. And I know we kind of touched on bytes and megabytes. A petabyte, just to put it into context, it's 1,000 terabytes. It's essentially 200,000 copies of White Lotus. I don't know why you'd want 200,000 copies. I like the show, but I wouldn't need 200,000. Or to put into a physical context, 20 million tall filing cabinets or 500 billion pages of printed text. Now, that's what the researchers now can access, search, organize, classify at the click of a button. Like, I think we're going to see, at the same time as all the concerns, I think we're going to see huge scientific advancements made through this over the coming few years as well.
Oh, definitely. In all sorts of areas. I think even Google, they want to be carbon free by 2030. So, yeah, advancements in the technology, the sustainability, because it's just getting bigger and bigger and reliant on it for more and more.
So I think we have well and truly answered the question of WTF the cloud. Mm-hmm. We now know what it is. We know some of the implications. We haven't touched on some of the broader dilemmas that I think we'll have to face over, or that we're currently facing around privacy, monopoly of this infrastructure, algorithmic bias in AI, data sovereignty, all these kind of big questions. But
they're all podcasts in themselves, aren't they?
Totally. So we're not going to go there. So where does it leave us with the teaching? How do we bring this to the classroom?
Yeah, well, you've touched on it. So how data is stored and protected. There's magnetic storage, solid-state electronics and data redundancy, the basics of binary code and electromagnetic memory. And then there's future tech like liquid cooling and quantum computing, and even DNA data storage. So rather than storing it as a binary 0-1 code. You can actually store it as a genetic A, C, T, and G code. But yeah, we're a bit off that. It's very expensive and yeah.
That really, though, would be symbiosis of human and technology, right?
Absolutely.
If they're injecting your Netflix show into your doctors.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm here for the latest binge, and they just jab you with the bit code.
But this sort of ties to the curriculum with magnets in year, well, it's in various places, but I think it's now in year 10 for Vic Science. And then we've got energy transfers and transformations in year 8 sciences, renewable energies, and the water as well, making that sustainability. Science as a human endeavour underpins a lot of this in terms of technological advancements, the ethics of what you perhaps should and shouldn't use AI for, and the data protection. And then space technology. So Vic 2.0 has a new space topic, and part of that it looks at the inventions that we got from space, like freeze-dried food, for example. But this is something that we use every day that ties back to your good story at the start.
Yeah, we literally wouldn't have this technology. Well, we may not have had this technology as quickly if there hadn't been a space race, if Russia hadn't beat America into outer space with Sputnik 1 and then triggered basically the race to space with the formation of the various agencies that then led to the formation of today's internet and cloud computing. So there we go.
Yeah. Neat little bow on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please like or subscribe or give us a rating, as it will help other people find Side of Science.
Oh, we never actually got back to what your action figure would include.
Oh, yeah. I think it would have, I don't know, maybe an apron because I like cooking, a smoothie because I definitely like smoothies, and maybe a little like dumbbell or something for exercise.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
I don't know if that was worth people waiting to hear, but there you go.
People won't sleep. Yeah, we need to know. Thank you.